on the bench we have a Cobra 138 XLR. Not the first one of these I've done a video on, so I'm not going to go over in detail a lot of the things, but this one's in pretty nice condition. Had I guess what I call the protective haze on the faceplate, so that was cleaned off and the chrome was polished, and it actually cleaned up really nice. It does have one little ding right here, and there's some really light little lines. They actually show up in the camera worse, I think, worse than they are in person. But that's just these face plates or the trim plate here is actually brushed aluminum, and then it has like a lacquer coating on it. And over the decades, moisture and atmospheric crap can work its way in between there, and you can kind of get those little oxidized lines, every once in a while. But overall, it's a really nice looking radio. Covers are in really good shape. Now, one thing that was kind of surprising with this radio is, usually most radios, it's not just a Cobra thing, it's not just a Uniden thing, because it's a Uniden circuit board, it's just a radio thing, and that is that nasty glue that they use to, fasten coils and capacitors down, anything big or anything that could move around, they'd pour that glue on, and it worked fine for decades, but eventually it gets, it becomes hygroscopic as it decomposes, so it absorbs water, it becomes corrosive, and anywhere where it's oozed down onto the board and it's touching copper leads of components, it'll eat the leads off, and can also cause shorts, because if left in there long enough, it eventually even becomes conductive and can start shorting out circuits. But surprisingly, in this radio, I can't say there wasn't any. There was two little spots of it. A little bit holding this transit in between the VCO block, and there's two transistors right here. There was a little dot on each one, just so the VCO block could move. Other than that, there's absolutely no glue in this thing. I don't think I've ever seen one that didn't have it just poured in there. And man, what a relief. That's just so much work I didn't have to do for this customer, because it can be a pain in the butt. Usually these two coils right here, yeah, man, they just took the bucket and poured that stuff on there. And it's a nightmare to get off, but like I say, really nice to see that there's just none in here. So made my life easier and less to bill the customer for. So he made out good. I don't know if the glue guy was on vacation day this radio was made, but hey, that's a pleasure to finally find one that clean. Few little pointers. If you ever have a radio with a chassis in it that looks like this, so. The reflection on that crystal filter is killing me there, isn't it? That's better. But if you ever have a radio that has a chassis that looks like this board was used in, God, I probably don't have enough fingers and toes to count the radios this thing was used in, but it's a Uniden board. This one's actually a PC196AB. The letters are just versions, because they came in different versions as they were updated over the years, because these radios did have a lot of updates done to them. Now this one, it's got a star on the production stamp on the back, so it had, I don't know if it had been sent back or if this might have been a reman, but usually I think the old reman Cobras had a reman sticker, but this one does have the star imprint that's been stamped on with like a rubber stamper onto the production number. So all of those updates have been done to this board. So there's on the bottom side there's a few cut traces with components added. Component values have been changed, like the transmit circuitors. Like this resistor has changed from, I think they're originally like 220 ohm to 180 ohm. So all of the service bulletins, I went over it, because like I say, there are a lot of service bulletins for the Cobra 138, 139 XLR radios. They've already all been done. So yeah, that's nice. That's just a lot of work that doesn't need to be done. So the only thing that really needed to be done to this was basically clean it up, because the customer wanted it cleaned up, and like I say, that was fairly easy. Change the electrolytic capacitors and do a transceiver alignment. Now, a few pointers on these radios. For starters, I know I've mentioned this before, but I like to keep mentioning it, because in case somebody's only ever watches, say, this video and they didn't watch any of the previous ones, just to try and get this info out. If you ever buy a radio that has one of these chassis, so you take the covers off your radio and it looks just like this, UPD 858 PLL chip, metal shield around it, big crystal filter right here, transformer in the back corner, relay right here. So, if your radio looks like this, the transformer layout, what you want to look for is, turn the volume down here, What you want to look for is back here in the back left corner. You've got your driver and final transistors here. In between these two little wires, and these actually pull off. They're push on, okay? And these are used, this is where you tap into the bias circuit with an amp meter to adjust your driver and final bias current. But directly in between those two terminals and just slightly behind it, right now you'll see a mustard colored one, kind of an off yellow color, right in front of that green dip capacitor. You see that little yellow guy down there, okay? You should replace that. If you do absolutely nothing else to your radio, you should change that tantalum capacitor. They are a known failure point in these radios. The best reason I can figure that they go bad is it's not that tantalum capacitors are bad. They're not like electrolytics, aluminum electrolytics that just go bad with age. They're actually very reliable, but I think the problem is they run some of these in some applications, you know, where they use tantalums, they run the voltage ratings on them so close to operating voltage, and they just get the snot pounded out of them, basically. And when this one goes bad, and tantalums have pretty much one failure mode, that's a dead short. They go from working perfectly, and all of a sudden, bam, it's a dead short. It's not like an electrolytic. It can take decades for those to slowly degrade. The tantalums, yeah, work in 1 second and not the next, and usually you'll just hear pop or a crack, and that's, sometimes you'll even get these radios, if you pull the covers off, you might not even see a tantalum capacitor there. There might only be 2 copper leads sticking up out of the board. I've seen that before, where it just exploded and there was nothing left but the leads left, you know, hanging out of the board. But if you turn your radio on, and it receives fine, but as soon as you key the microphone, either the fuse blows or the meter lights get really dim, change that cap. Really, really good chance that capacitor is bad, and it's shorted. So, just a little hint. Another thing, actually, was talking with Mark the other day, and we were talking about tantalum capacitors. When you replace a tantalum capacitor, you should install a tantalum capacitor. So in this radio, I think there's actually only 3 in this. That one, and then there's 2 up here for the filtering on the PLL chip. Manufacturers don't use these little guys, because this is originally what was back here, a blue one. Now, manufacturers don't use tantalum capacitors unless they have to, and the reason is they cost more. Tantalum's a precious metal, and these capacitors cost a lot more than an aluminum electrolytic capacitor does. So they only use these in circuits where they have to. There's no choice, just by the characteristics, the low ESR characteristics and frequency, and you know, there's a whole lot of characteristics for all types of different components, but they're used, like I say, for a specific reason. So when you replace the tantalum capacitors, be sure you always reinstall a tantalum capacitor in its place. Don't use an aluminum electrolytic in place of a tantalum. You know, in the case of these are filtering on the PLL chip. If you remove these tantalum capacitors, what you'll end up with is basically interference in your synthesizer circuit. You'll get distortion, you know, frequency distortion. So you don't want to go changing these, especially these two in the synthesizer circuit. You don't want to go changing these out to aluminum electrolytic. And in the long run, what ends up happening is, if you were to put aluminum electrolytics in there, that noise that's now in your signal ends up getting out of the radio and causing harmonics and distortion. So you don't want that. So the easy thing to do, just put tantalums in here. And even if you were to replace all the tantalums in every radio you ever own, honestly, yes, for manufacturers that are making radios by the tens of thousands at a time, yes, they cost more, so they use them very sparingly, only where they have to. But if you're doing a radio yourself, if you're going to recap it, and you decide, now you don't have to change, like say, that one is a must. The rest of them, yeah, they'll probably last forever. They're perfectly fine here. But you know, when you change them, just make sure you use tantalum. It's going to cost a little bit more than the aluminum electrolytic, but it's not like it's a $5 part. You know, where you pay for the same value, you might pay 5 or 10 cents for an aluminum electrolytic. The tantalum might cost you 20 or 30 cents. So yeah, in the long run, it's probably going to be less than $1 just to, you know, put it in the proper caps. So I just wanted to point that out. Me and Mark were talking about that, and he brought that up about how important it is to always replace tantalum capacitors with tantalum capacitors. Do not install aluminum electrolytics like these here. So that's pretty much it. Like I say, just wanted to show it. It's a really nice radio. It's a pleasure to get one that had, was unmodified, didn't have. The best thing was, like I say, it's one of those you look at the radio and go, ah, when you see there's none of that corrosive glue in here. It's so nice to not have to spend an hour in there with a dental pick and a screwdriver and little ultra fine, tweezers trying to get all that crud off the boards and clean the leads off and changing parts. So yeah, it's really nice for a change. So there's just a quickie on what to, this radio and a few little things to keep an eye out for. Like I say, really nice radios. They sound really good on air. You really don't need to do anything to these. It's one of those radios you don't need to modify it to sound good. It sounds good out of the box. They, and the few flaws that they had with these radios over the years, the earlier versions, they, Uniden came out with service bulletins, and of course Cobra, and the different manufacturers would list those bulletins under their own name. But they came out with bulletins, and the later production radios had all those bulletins done to them at the factory. So, any of the normal problems that these things have, or the downfalls of them, they were taken care of with service bulletins over the years. But if you get one of these, do yourself a favor, look up those bulletins. You can download them on, I think they're all on CB Tricks. I've got original copies of them, but I think all those bulletins for these chassis, they're on CB Tricks. So, download the bulletins, look them over. It's usually fairly easy to see if they've been done. In the case of the modification back here, where you cut a trace, install a resistor in series, there's a resistor you change. Modifications like that, you don't have to look at every single part. If you look in there, like that big resistor that's right underneath of that transistor, if you see that that's 180 ohms, the modification's been done. Because if it hadn't been done, that would be, like I say, I think it's a 220. So, just look, okay, yep, or you flip the board over, yep, there's a cut trace there with a resistor across it. You don't need to check every individual part. There was absolutely no reason for somebody to cut that trace and install the resistor on the bottom, or change this resistor to the other value unless they were doing that bulletin. So it's fairly quick to, eyeball them real quick. Just pick a part that's easy to find, look, yep, that one's been changed, so that mod, that update's been done. But there you go, there's another nice Cobra 138 XLR ready to go back into service, and a customer will be installing this one in a mobile application. Only thing he really did want done wasn't so much to the radio itself, it was actually the covers. He asked me if I would install a piece of cloth on the inside of the cover, because the speakers on these, you see the two wires hanging up here, there's another little platform that goes in here that has the speaker mounted to it, so the speakers aren't mounted to the covers. He asked if I'd glue a piece of grill cloth in there, because he's going to be mounting this sideways to a console, and he doesn't want the radio, basically the radio filling up with dirt, because it's got the louvered bottom on these radios. So yeah, I stuck a piece of grill cloth in there to keep the dirt out of the inside of the radio. But yeah, other than that, it's basically an out-of-the-box condition radio in really good shape. Actually, see. Here's Channel 19, a couple of local truckers. But there you go, another one back in service.